So this video is going to just show you the process of taking your geometry or whatever model you may have within Maxwell Studio 2.6 through the HDR Light Studio workflow and then out to a final render. So to begin with, I have this Herman Miller chair right here, and I have some materials applied to it. But one thing I do want to point out to you is that I'm going to start with my camera set to an EV of 8.5. I've also got my f-stop set to 16, but that's not really relevant to what we're about to do. What I want to do is I want to come over to my environment settings. Now, notice that the way that my layout is set up may not match what you have in Studio. That's okay because Studio is a highly customizable layout. So I have mine over here, but you could have yours anywhere. If you don't see it, go to Window, and then come down to our environment and make sure that that is checked like so. So what I want to do here is I just want to come over and enable fire. And we're going to have our overexposed, because remember what our camera exposure, our EV, was set to 8.5, and this right now is currently using our environment of sky. We want to change that from sky to image base. Now, right off the bat, we're going to get a black render. The reason why is because we don't have any lighting information coming into this. Now, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I have these all open. If you have these collapsed, make sure that you open them all because we're going to be working with each and every one of them. We're going to come up here where it says HDR image, and we're going to switch that to HDR Light Studio. Now, what that'll do is it'll instantly go back to HDR image. And the reason why is because the first time we click that, it's going to load an EXR file that we have by default when we're working with HDR Studio. So I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to choose HDR Light Studio again. And this time it's going to stay. Now I'm going to do the same thing with all of these. So I'm going to click it once, then click it again to make sure that that stays, and then click it once and click it again. Now the reason why you have to do each of these channels is because if you don't, then it's going to pull its information from someplace other than our HDR Light Studio, which is not what we want. So we'll just do that once and then twice. Now you won't have to do it twice after the first time. After you've done it the first time, you only have to do it once and it will remember. So now what we want to do is we want to actually launch HDR Light Studio, which is this button right here. So I'm going to launch that. And now that we're working here with an HDR Light Studio Live, you can see immediately that our fire render has updated. And what's gone on here is that we're now using that background. We're no longer using that white EXR file. We're now using the background information. And if I start dropping stuff into this, like so, you can see that that's going to update within our Maxwell Fire preview. So this, at this point, becomes very much what we've talked about in previous videos. So we don't really need to cover the HDR Light Studio Live interface because I've covered all that. But I'm just going to go ahead and just do a few things to this to make this pretty clear that we're dealing with something unique, like so. You can see that that's going to be reflected in here. Maybe I'll come over and turn off the background. You can see that's reflected very clearly there. Maybe I'll come over here and grab a spotlight. And maybe we'll colorize that, maybe with an orange color, like so. And we'll drop that in somewhere around that neck of the woods. So we've got some interesting lighting going on back here. And we've also got our background lighting going on. So that looks good, right? I'm ready to go. And now I want to go ahead and do a final render because I'm done tweaking out whatever I wanted to do in HDR Light Studio Live. And I'm ready to go ahead and exit out of Fire and actually press the render button to render out of Maxwell. Now, if I wanted to, I could also at this time come over here to camera parameters and change something like, say, our EV value to something around, say, 9 to get a lower exposure. So maybe I like that a little bit better and we'll leave that at 9. But what I want to do here is I want to come over here to this upper right-hand corner and I want to click the render button. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to render out an EXR file or an HDR file, whatever I want to. So I'm going to choose EXR from this dropdown. If you don't have that, make sure you do. And then we're going to browse to a place we're going to save this. I'm going to put it right on my desktop and I'm just going to name it something like test1 and hit save. And then I'm going to hit save, and that's going to export. Now, this may take some time if you have one of the larger sizes selected. Personally, I'm fine with the middle size, and you can have larger sizes or smaller sizes depending upon what it is that you're wanting. Primarily what this has to do with is the detail. So that's plenty of detail for what I'm looking for, so I'm going to be really happy with that. Now, the interesting thing here is that if you don't do this next step, every time that you go to render, you're going to have to re-render out that export, and this is not going to be good. So what I would recommend that you do at this point, because remember, we're ready to render out of Maxwell completely. So come over here to Project and say Save Project, and just name it something like Test1. Now, this won't be an EXR, this will be an HDI file, which is basically the setup for working within this live dialog. So I'm going to hit save, and then I'm going to come over here to project, and I'm going to say clear lighting. And that's basically going to bring us back to a blank canvas. Now, what's going to happen is you'll also notice if we come back over to environment settings, that these have all changed over to HDR image. See, they're all HDR image, they're not HDR Light Studio any longer. And they're listing test1.exr as the file that they're getting their information from. If that's not happening on yours, then it's not working properly. But now that we have that information, I can stop Fire because I don't need Fire rendering any longer, and I can go ahead and hit render. Now, the thing is, it's going to ask me to re-render. That generate HDR image dialog will pop up, but we don't need to re-render because there's nothing on that canvas. Remember, we cleared it. So you just hit cancel, and what'll happen is it will pull up the proper EXR file that we're looking for when it comes time to render. So this won't take hardly but a second. I mean, this renders very, very fast. You can see my benchmark right now is at 900 and it's probably going to keep going up because this just renders super, super fast. So one of the great things about working with HDR Light Studio is that we get these really nice fast renders and we have this very flexible lighting setup. But again, if you don't follow those processes within Maxwell Studio 2.6, you can find yourself to be a little confused about what it's doing and why it's doing it.